2024 has been a good year for my macro photography, and even though I've been shooting macro for over 10 years now, I would say that I've captured some of my best macro images ever within the past 6 months. And I would put that down to experimenting with new techniques and trying out new equipment. Today's video is an in-depth review of one of those lenses. In today's video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the newly released TT Artisan 100mm macro lens. Most macro lenses provide you with a life-size reproduction of your subject, which is often referred to as one-to-one reproduction. However, this TT Artisan lens goes beyond that and provides double that, 2-to-1 reproduction. If you're new to macro and you don't know what 2-to-1 means, then fear not, as I've made a complete tutorial on macro photography for beginners, which I'll link to at the end of this video. I also followed that up with a more in-depth tutorial on extreme macro photography, which is more applicable to this lens as its special party trick is reproducing your subject at twice its life size on the sensor. I would say it's a unique party trick, however I already own the Laowa 100mm macro lens, which provides the same magnification. Therefore I will be making some close comparisons between these two lenses, and I might also throw in some comparisons to the Canon 100mm macro lens for good measure. This video is not sponsored by any of these brands, although TT Artisan have sent me this lens and I get to keep it, but they will not get to see this video before it's published. Alright, first of all, let's take a look around the lens. As you can see, it's completely metal. It has a manual aperture control ring with a reassuring click as you rotate it, which goes from f2.8 down to f22. There is a generous focus ring which has metal grooves cut out, providing excellent grip. The focus ring is very firm compared to other lenses I use, very firm. But this does allow for minor adjustments without accidentally nudging your focus. From the closest focusing distance of 25cm to infinity, it's roughly a 180-degree turn, which is quite a lot. But on the basis this is a macro lens first, I would expect users not to be focusing to infinity on a regular basis. There is no optical stabilization on the lens, and depending on which camera body you mount it onto, you may benefit from the IBIS, and there are no switches or custom buttons on the lens. It comes with a metal cap that fits over the entirety of the lens, and there are 4 fixing points around the lens for a cold shoe mount, allowing small LED lights to be mounted to aid focusing, which is a nice touch. There is no weather sealing, and it comes in 8 different camera mounts at the time of recording. The lens weighs 748 grams, and the optics are made up of 14 elements in 10 groups. The minimum focusing distance, like I've already said, is 25cm, and it's got 12 aperture blades. Returning back to the aperture control, you cannot control the aperture from the camera at all, and the aperture settings are not recorded in the RAW file. It will simply say f0.0. However, the shutter speed and ISO are still recorded in the EXIF data. If you're comparing the TT Artisan with the Canon 100mm L series and the Laowa 100mm, you'll see that the Canon is actually much smaller, as it stops at 1-to-1 reproduction. The other two lenses provide 2-to-1, and looking down the barrel of the lens, it's almost like there's the optics for a 100mm lens sliding up and down the tube. Therefore, the length of this lens is the same as a 100mm macro lens plus an extension tube. This theory is further supported by the fact that when you turn the focus from 1-to-1 through to 2-to-1 reproduction, the image gets darker. This is exactly the same on the Laowa or if you use extension tubes, and you therefore just need to take it into consideration when you're focusing on very close subjects, because you'll be juggling your settings to compensate for this changing exposure. The easiest way of doing this is to shoot in auto ISO, so that you have the reassurance of having a fixed aperture and shutter speed, fixed flash output if you're using artificial light, and you will get consistent results this way. One other consideration when you're using manual aperture lenses is that if you're shooting at a small aperture and you're looking through the viewfinder, then you'll be looking at a very dark scene, which in turn makes it more difficult to focus on your subject. You can combat this by having a focusing light such as a flexible LED. If you want to know more about this, then check out my in-depth tutorial on extreme macro photography. Okay, that's enough about specs. Let's take a look at the images. All of these images were captured on a Sony A7iv using the TT Artisan 100mm macro lens at a variety of apertures, some of them with flash and some without. Some of you watching this might be wondering why you would buy a manual focus macro lens when there are plenty of autofocus lenses out there, which is a valid question. However, when you start to shoot such small subjects, you can't rely upon a camera's autofocus system to nail the focus on, say, a jumping spider's eye, because it's got many of them and the camera simply doesn't know which one to focus on. Even when using an autofocus lens, I would still switch it to manual focus for close-up work to absolutely nail the focus. If you're looking for a portrait lens that also doubles up as a macro lens, then you should opt for an autofocus lens, which is really going to benefit from a modern mirrorless camera. You will of course pay more for an autofocus lens, but you can achieve higher magnifications by investing in a macro extension tube, which achieves the same result as this does. But for dedicated close macro work, manual focus lenses are perfectly adequate and there will be a cost saving. One key difference between the Laowa and the TT Artisan is that Laowa includes a UV filter to put over the inside of the lens, which would inevitably collect dust and become unusable. So I'm glad that TT Artisan made the decision to have a fixed glass element on the front of the lens. Let's do some pixel peeping and see how these three lenses compare. So the first comparison, on the left hand side we've got the TT Artisan at f2.8 and on the right hand side the Laowa at f2.8. Both of these are at 1:1 reproduction, and that's why a pound coin is pretty much filling up the frame. These are both at their minimum focus distance, and let's start to zoom in. So one of the caveats that I'll say is it's very difficult to get the coin parallel. In order to focus, I was zooming in on the back of my camera as far as it would allow me to. As you look on the right hand side, have a look at this detail. That is in focus. The Laowa here has got an advantage over the TT Artisan, but as you come up here, you can see that this text here is in focus, and you can see here that the Laowa has the slight advantage at f2.8. These are unedited RAW files, no lens corrections. But confidently you can see that where there are contrasty areas, there's no diffraction, no color fringing or anything. So a good performance at f2.8. Let's have a look with the aperture stopped down a little. So what you'll see here, going from f2.8 to 5.6, now we're getting more of the coin in focus, and you're getting definitely an upgrade in the sharpness levels as well. So as you go around the edge of the coin, you can see here the TT Artisan is really sharp at the edges here. Absolutely solid performances from both of the lenses, and at 100% you can see a slight difference, but you need to remember that there is still a price difference between these two lenses as well. So the TT Artisan is doing a really good job. Right, let's see how the TT Artisan compares to my trusted Canon 100mm. Right, now before I zoom in, I've been using the Canon L series lens, the 100mm f2.8, for at least 10 years, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the sharpest lens that I own. It's reassuring to see that what I think is a very sharp lens is coming across very sharp, and I do shoot it wide open at f2.8 most of the time. So the Canon is superior to the TT Artisan. You pay a lot more for it. It does have image stabilization, autofocus and weather sealing. Okay, that's reassuring. I'm glad I spent my money on that all those years ago. I mean, there's not really much in it. There's more contrast on the Canon. If you have a look at all of these scratches, there is more detail on the Canon, but it's very close. That's good. Right, let's see what these two look like at f5.6. You're getting an incredible amount of detail. We've already seen how the TT Artisan performs at f5.6, and it's very good indeed. You're getting a bit more sharpness from the Canon, a bit more contrast, but this is at 100%. This is really pixel peeping. As long as you don't need the f2.8, you can see here the TT Artisan is keeping up with the Canon at 5.6. Alright, that's enough of 1:1 reproduction. Let's go a bit closer at 2:1. Right, so this is not digital cropping, this is straight out of camera, no lens corrections at all, and this is what a pound coin looks like at 2:1 reproduction. So as I zoom in, what I will say is, when you get to this level of magnification, you've got to be very careful about what you focus on. When I focused on the top of these letters, this was out of focus and it didn't look right. So what I decided to do was focus on the scratches. This is what these two lenses look like side by side at 100%, 2:1 reproduction at f2.8. Let's see how they perform at f5.6. So even if you stop down to f5.6 and you focus on these scratches, the top raised letters are still not in focus. This is the sort of minimal amount of focus you get at these magnifications. Like, you cannot even get the scratches here and the top of the letters in the same focal plane at 2:1. So you pick your focus very carefully. Look at the detail in this coin here. You can see all of the individual ridges and the scratches. Very similar. I'd say that the TT Artisan and the Laowa are performing very, very similar here. Based upon the 2:1 reproduction, I don't know if I've got a preference for which one I would go with. And considering that there is a massive price difference between these two, I'd say the TT Artisan is going to do the job just fine. Okay, that is enough pixel peeping for now. In conclusion, the TT Artisan 100mm macro lens is an excellent performer. There are no real-world optical flaws, even under close inspection, and at an affordable price. Only you can answer whether you need an autofocus macro lens that doubles up as a portrait lens with optical stabilization and weather sealing. But if you are specializing in macro and want excellent optical quality without breaking the bank, then the TT Artisan lens at £320 and the Laowa at £550 are excellent choices. Hopefully you found this review and comparison helpful. If you've got any questions, then let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to learn more about extreme macro photography, then I would recommend watching this video next. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.